Chapter 21. The Expectant Church. Revelation. Background. The book of Revelation closes the canon and the history of the New Testament. Irrespective of whether or not it was the last in order to be written, it is final in its thought, for it embodies the expectation of a church that had been launched in the world as an institution, and that was awaiting eagerly the consummation of its mission. Revelation is unique in many ways. It is the only book of the New Testament that is completely devoted to prophecy. Practically all of its imagery is related to figures that appear in the Old Testament prophetical books, and a large part of its content is predictive, dealing with the future. The author stated explicitly that the messenger who brought him the last vision had come from the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, who sent his angel to show unto his servants the things which must shortly come to pass. Revelation 22:6. And in the following verse he spoke of the prophecy of this book. A Revelation belongs to the category of apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic literature was usually produced in times of persecution and oppression as a means of encouraging those who were suffering for their faith. It was characterized by 1. An intense despair of present circumstances and an equally intense hope of divine intervention in the future. 2. By the use of symbolic language, dreams, and visions. 3. By the introduction of celestial and demonic powers as messengers and agents in the progress of God's purpose. 4. By the prediction of a catastrophic judgment of the wicked and of a supernatural deliverance for the righteous. And 5. Frequently by the pseudonymous ascription of the writing to a prominent character of biblical history such as Ezra, 2nd Esdras, or Enoch, the Book of Enoch. The Book of Revelation possesses most of these characteristics, except that the author declares his name and assumes that he is known, not as a past celebrity, but as a present participant in the affairs of those whom he addressed. The conditions under which the book was written may fairly be deduced from a study of its content. It was addressed to 7 churches of the province of Asia, which had been in existence for a considerable period of time, and in which there had been spiritual development and decline. In the letters to these churches are hints that persecution was either imminent or that it had already begun. The church at Smyrna was about to suffer and have tribulation 10 days, 2:10. Antipas had suffered martyrdom at Pergamum, 2:13. Philadelphia was to be exempted from the hour of trial, 3:10. Even if these passages be interpreted of future events, the atmosphere of Revelation bespeaks hostility and oppression. In the main body of the book, famine, war, pestilence, economic pressure, and persecution are regarded as the ordinary phenomena of its setting. There is little doubt that imperial Rome formed the model for the power of the state which Revelation depicted as the enemy of Christianity. The beast that had authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation, 1307, had its counterpart in the universal rule of Rome under the Caesars. The mark which men would be compelled to carry in order to buy or sell, 1316-17, was the term used for the imperial seal which was stamped upon wills, contracts, bills of sale, and other documents to give them legal standing. The harlot, called Babylon the Great, drunken with the blood of saints and of martyrs, was seated on 7 mountains, 17:9, the number of hills in Rome. Whether or not the Apocalypse should be finally interpreted in terms of Rome, it was certainly applied to Rome when it was first read by Christians. 2 schools of thought prevail concerning the time and circumstances for which it was written. One group assigns it to the days of Nero, when the burning of Rome evoked persecution of Christians. The opinion is substantiated chiefly by 2 considerations. If John, the son of Zebedee, wrote the Revelation, as well as the Gospel and epistles that are attributed to him, the radical differences in language and in style between the 2 could be explained better if Revelation were an early effort, written when his command of Greek was still imperfect, while the Gospel and the epistles were written at a later date when he had gained in proficiency. Again, it has been suggested that the mystic number, 666, 13:18, is the sum total of the numerical values of the Hebrew letters that spell Neron Caesar, and therefore the personage described in the chapter must be Nero. This type of reasoning seems too flimsy to warrant any fixed conclusion, especially when it has no support from external tradition. The second possibility for dating the apocalypse places it late in the 1st century in the reign of Domitian, A.D. 81 to 96. This dating has at least the advantage of explicit external evidence. Irenaeus said that John received the vision no very long time since, but almost in our day, towards the end of Domitian's reign. While there was probably no extended persecution under Domitian, his insistence that he be worshipped as deity and the increasing tyranny of his dictatorship put him in opposition to the growth of Christianity and presaged the growth of social, economic, and religious conditions such as Revelation prophesied. Revelation, then, is a witness to the growing hostility between the Church and the Roman state. It does not necessarily imply that a universal policy of persecuting Christians had been adopted, but it does make clear that there can be no compromise between a pagan state and the Christian Church. The logical outcome of paganism is totalitarianism, which involves the worship of the ruler who controls all political allegiance, all economic resources, all religious observances, and all personal worship. The tolerance which Rome extended to the early Church passed into suspicion as Paul and other Christian preachers were brought to trial by the Jewish leaders, and then the suspicion deepened into contempt and hatred. By the end of the 1st century, Christians found themselves on the defensive everywhere. They were realizing the truth of the words of Jesus. If ye were of the world would love its own. But because ye are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. John 15:19. Revelation was written as an encouragement for the churches that were feeling this growing hostility, and as a warning to the careless and negligent Christians who were tempted to lapse into an easy conformity to the world. It was the last voice of a closing century. The author, according to his own testimony, was named John, and was an eyewitness of the things that he saw. Rev. 1:1-2. He was in Patmos, a rocky island off the coast of Greece, where he had been incarcerated because of his faith. 1:9. While there, he was given the vision which he described, and was ordered to transmit it to the 7 churches of Asia. 1:10, with which he was familiar. Some of the Greek in the Apocalypse seems awkward and even ungrammatical. One should remember that the author was attempting to put into human language scenes that could not be described in ordinary terms, and consequently, his grammar and vocabulary both proved inadequate. Furthermore, he was probably of Aramaic descent, and may have had difficulty in expressing himself smoothly in Greek. If in writing the Gospel and the Epistles he had the aid of a skilled amanuensis, but wrote the Apocalypse himself, some of the differences could easily be explained. Revelation is interpretative. It contains no less than 400 allusions to the Old Testament, although no direct citation can be found. Its imagery and its program are related to Old Testament prophecy, and they connect its meaning with the trends of the new dispensation. Revelation gives an estimate of the spiritual temper of the church life through the judgment on the 7 churches of Asia. The sequence of visions that follows, by whatever system it is interpreted, is a picture of the ultimate consummation of God's purpose. However strange its symbolism may be, it is the one book of the New Testament that gives any organized forecast of the future. Interpretations. There are 4 main schools of interpretation of the book of Revelation among modern expositors. The Preterist school. The Preterist school holds that the symbolism of Revelation relates only to the events of the day in which it was written. All the imagery of the seals and trumpets and vials has no bearing upon the future. The writer was simply expressing his moral indignation concerning the abuses of his own day when he spoke of future judgment. This is the view of the majority of liberal scholars such as R. H. Charles and C.C. Torrey. It has the advantage of connecting Revelation with the thought and historical events of the day in which it was written, but it makes no allowance for any element of predictive prophecy. The Idealist school. The Idealist view, which is often closely allied with the Preterist school, considers Revelation to be only a symbolic picture of the enduring struggle between good and evil, and between Christianity and paganism. It holds that its symbols cannot be identified as historic events either in the past or in the future. They are simply trends or ideals. So Raymond Calkins says, "We understand now what the word revelation means. It does not mean a revelation of the future mysteries of the end of the world, the millennium or the day of judgment. Neither does it mean primarily a revelation of the glories of heaven or the blessedness of the redeemed. Rather, it means a revelation of the infinite God, mighty to save, an uncovering for the consolation and inspiration of God's people of the all-conquering power of an omnipotent Savior. The idealistic method of interpretation has the advantage of focusing the attention of the reader upon the ethical and spiritual truth of Revelation rather than upon the debatable aspects of its symbolism. On the other hand, it tends to undervalue that symbolism as a vehicle of predictive prophecy. Its spiritualization strips the apocalypse of all predictive value and dissociates it from any definite historical consummation. Judgment Day, according to this theory, comes whenever a great moral issue is decided. It is not a final climax in which a supernatural Christ ascends a visible throne. The historicist school. The historicist interpretation holds that Revelation outlines in symbolic form the entire course of history of the Church from Pentecost to the advent of Christ. The symbols portray in sequence the great events that have taken place. That is, the seals are the breakup of the Roman Empire. The eruption of locusts from the bottomless pit is a picture of the Mohammedan invasions, etc. Each major event in the history of Christendom was thus broadly foreshadowed, so that Revelation becomes a calendar of events written in advance. Most of the reformers, insofar as they dealt with Revelation at all, the majority of the older commentaries, and many modern evangelical preachers, such as A. J. Gordon and A.B. Simpson, held this view. It has at least ostensible warrant in the phrase of Revelation 4:1. Come up hither, and I will show thee the things which must come to pass hereafter. The historicist view is more literal than the idealist view, but its advocates have never achieved unanimity on what the individual symbols mean. Even among the historicists, there are nearly as many interpretations as there are commentators. Not all of them can be right, and since there is such wide divergence among them, there is at least the possibility that the methods may be wrong. The Futurist School. The Futurists hold that the first 3 chapters of Revelation apply either to the day in which the book was written, or else that the 7 churches of Asia represent 7 eras of church history, bridging the gap from the apostolic age to the return of Christ. To this extent, the Futurists are historicists, beginning with the phrase in 4:1, the things which must come to pass hereafter. They contend that the remainder of the book deals with events that will take place in a period called the Great Tribulation, just preceding the return of Christ, and variously estimated from 3½ to 7 years in length. The events of the apocalypse, relegated to this period, are interpreted as literally as possible, and are thus regarded as wholly future to the existing era. Expositors of the type of J. A. C. I. Schofield A.C., Gabeline, H.A., Ironside, and others are futurists. The millennial views, a somewhat different approach to Revelation from the eschatological rather than from the historical standpoint, gives 3 other divisions of thought, based on varying interpretations of the 20th chapter. The crux of the interpretation is centered in the question as to whether the 1,000 years are to be considered as literal or figurative, and as to whether they precede or follow the second coming of Christ. The postmillennial view regards the 1,000 years as probably figurative of a long interval that precedes the coming of Christ. At the beginning of the period, the triumph of the gospel over the nations will introduce the reign of peace, which will endure until Christ returns in final judgment. The amillennial view holds that the millennium is non-existent as a literal period, or possibly that it represents the intermediate state of the dead. Christ may return at any time, when he will judge the world and usher in the eternal state of bliss for the righteous, the new heavens and the new earth. The premillennial view holds that Christ will return personally to initiate his kingdom, that the righteous dead will be raised, that they will reign personally with him on the earth for 1,000 years, that subsequent to his reign there will be a final rebellion that shall be immediately suppressed, the wicked dead will be judged, and the eternal state will begin. There is no necessary correlation between these views and the chronological interpretations previously defined. Generally, the millennial question is treated seriously only by historicists and by futurists, since the preterists and idealists would not regard the 1,000 years as anything more than another symbol. The following diagram will illustrate the different methods of interpretation. Content. The real key to the interpretation of Revelation does not lie in any one of these theories, however great its merits, but in the structure of the book itself as it presents the person of Christ. The very title of the book, The Revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show unto his servants, even the things which must shortly come to pass, indicates that the central theme is the person of Christ as he reveals the future. There is some question as to whether the revelation of Jesus Christ means the revelation of his person, or the revelation which he gave, which came from him. If the former interpretation of the title sets the topic, then revelation is an unfolding of the person of Christ as he is related to the future. If the second interpretation is taken, the main topic is the program of the future as mediated through Christ. Either is grammatically possible, and either makes Christ the central figure of the book. Much controversy might have been averted had expositors approached Revelation from the neutral standpoint of its literary structure, making their eschatology dependent upon their Christology. A second clue to the content of the book appears in the form which the author's own experience has given to it. Obviously, the book consists of a series of visions, each of which is a unit in itself. While there are many small units introduced by the phrase, "and I saw," 5:1, 11, 6:1, 9, etc. And there are four main divisions which are introduced by the phrase "in the Spirit," 1:10, 4:2, 17, 1-3, 21, 9-10. These divisions are of varied content and of unequal length, but they give a unitary organization to the book. Together with the opening prologue and the closing epilogue, they divide Revelation into 6 sections. Several series of 7s appear throughout the book. There are 7 churches, 2:1008 12, 18, 3:1, 14, 7 spirits of God, 4:5, 7 seals, 6:1, 3,005, 7:9 12, 8:1, 7 trumps, 8:6, 7, 8, 10 12, 9:1, 11-15, 7 thunders, 10:3, 7 bowls, 1 shans and 2, 4, 8, 10, 12 saints, 7 major personages, 12:1, 3, 5, 7, 13:1, 3 sanai to Adam feet. Inha 1, and 7 beatitudes, 1:3, basfinisation, basin 20 and 22 7 times. Some of these are a part of the literary structure of the book and are listed in close sequence, and some are not. The use of the numeric 7 indicates a design of thought that makes the revelation more than a haphazard accumulation of weird symbols. Other numerical combinations or series appear sporadically. There are 24 elders, 4:4, 4 living creatures, 4:6, 4 horsemen, 6-1-8, 4 angels, 9:14, 144,000 in companies of the redeemed, 7:4, 14 Buffy 1, 12 gates of the city of God, 21:12, 12 foundations, 21:14, 12 kinds of fruit in the tree of life, 22:2, and various others. One other phrase deserves mention. In 4:5, 8:5, 11:19, and 16:18, there were lightnings and voices and thunders. The last 3 of these occur respectively at the termini of a series of judgments. Are they repeated, or are they a clue that the 3 judgments are coterminous, and consequently that each judgment is simply an intensification of its predecessor? Outline using the clues. Thus provided by the book itself, the following outline is proffered. Please refer to page 393 of the textbook for the outline. Evaluation. A final interpretation of Revelation is not within the province of this book, but a few observations may prove helpful to the student. Revelation is written in the style of apocalyptic literature, but it differs sharply from the general body of such writings in that it has a definite author who names himself and who has a definite destination in view. His chief purpose is not to predict in advance all the details of church history, but to show the general trends of the present age and their consummation in the personal return of Christ. The threefold declaration and challenge of the epilogue I come quickly. 22:7, 12:20, reiterates the promise to his churches, 2:16, 3:11, and makes the entire book a warning to the world and an encouragement to God's people. Certain unities pervade the entire book. The person of Christ is dominant, first as the glorified figure with blazing countenance, clothed in white, who inspects, reproves, and counsels the church. As the claimant of the right to administer judgment under the authority of the sealed roll, he is the Lamb, who has acquired this right by his redemptive work. 5:4-7. In the execution of judgment, he is the conqueror, riding upon a white horse like a Roman general in triumphal procession, 19:11, with the title, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, 19:16. In the consummation of all things he is the bridegroom of his people, 19:7, 21:9, again called the Lamb because of his redemption. The chronological arrangement of Revelation is disputable. The historicist sees in it a complete calendar of all major events from the time of its writing until the coming of Christ. The futurist relegates most of the book to a 7-year period immediately preceding the appearing of the Lord, and the preterist and the idealist regard it as independent of all chronology. Certain facts, however, seem plain. The letters in the first 3 chapters were directed to the existing churches in the cities of Asia, so that they relate to a period contemporary with the author. The opening of the vision in the 4th chapter assigned it to the things which must come to pass hereafter, 4:1, beginning with the writer's day and continuing indefinitely. The last 2 visions of the book have not yet been fulfilled, and apply to the end time yet to come. Revelation thus belongs partially to the past, partially to the present, and partially to the future. The last 2 sections parallel each other. The former, Revelation 17:1-21 chapter 8, is occupied with the doom of the evil world system represented by the harlot Babylon. The second, Revelation 21:9 down to 22:5, describes the final appearance of the Bride of Christ, the New Jerusalem. The parallelism of these 2 sections involves both similarity and contrast. Both are introduced by one of the 7 angels that had the 7 bowls. The heavenly messenger invited the seer to view the scene by the words, "Come hither." Each represents the terminus of a purpose. One, the end of the trend away from God, the other the end of redemption. The parallelism of contrast is equally plain. The former section introduces a harlot, the latter a bride. The former sets the scene in a wilderness, 17:3, the latter on a mountain, 21:10. The former says that on the harlot are written names of blasphemy, 17:3. The latter states that the names of the 12 tribes and of the 12 apostles are inscribed on the holy city, 21-12 and 14. The former presents Babylon, the city of corruption and judgment, 17:6. The latter describes the New Jerusalem which comes down out of heaven pure and chaste, 21:10. The former perishes in dire judgment, the latter endures in eternal light. The former is cursed, the latter is blessed. The book of Revelation gives a divine perspective on history. However its symbols may be interpreted in detail, its overall outlook is that of divine holiness, which sees both the virtues and the shortcomings of the churches and the doom and hope of the world. The message to the churches is sent by the figure who moves in the midst of the golden lampstands. The scene for the administration of judgment centers around the throne of God, 4:19-5, and the final judgment is pronounced from the selfsame throne, 20:11. In the description of the new heavens and the new earth, the throne is still central, 22:1, as the source of the river of life. This emphasis on the throne makes clear the concept of the sovereignty of God in Revelation, and his eternal rulership in the affairs of men. The dominant optimism of the book is countered by its glaring picture of evil. It contains no hint that the world at large will improve with the passing of time, nor that at the end all men will have turned to God in repentance and faith. It depicts the last civilization as highly prosperous, culturally advanced, and utterly godless, 18:1-5. The last act of organized humanity is an armed rebellion against God and his Christ, 27:2-10. In no other book of the Bible, unless it be in the words of Jesus, Is the final doom of sin more terribly drawn? 2015. To the modern man of the mid-20th century, the apocalypse now seems less apocalyptic than it did to his father and to Biff's grandfather. The mysterious references to images that talked, 13:15, to making fire come down out of heaven, 13:13, to economic control of large populations, 13:16-17, to compulsory obedience to a synthetic religion, 13:14, to the wholesale devastation of the earth by elemental changes in the sea and by physical changes in the heat of the sun, 16:3-8, the summoning of all the kings of the earth to do battle, 16:14, the leadership of the nations vested in one or two persons, 19-20, and the complete collapse of the center of civilization in 1 hour, 18:18-20, are not outside the reach of possibility at the present time. In many respects, the Apocalypse is the most modern book in existence. With the final promise, "I come quickly," the New Testament ends. God spoke by the law and by the prophets. He has spoken again by his Son, who now once at the end of the ages hath been manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Hebrews 9:26. One greater revelation is yet to come, when he shall appear a second time, apart from sin, to them that wait for him, unto salvation. 9:28. To that revelation and to that victory the book of Revelation points.